the nearly $500 million Belize dollars that Venezuela has on its books for the Petrocaribe debt.
Millions of dollars spent from the Petrocaribe loan program were spent unconstitutionally.
Somewhere between 400 million Belize dollars to 500 million Belize dollars.
With the debt the Belizean government owes to Venezuela at a staggering $400 million, and a murky path as to how we got here, here's the story of Belize's Petrocaribe loan from its promising start to its catastrophic end. In September 2005, the Belizean government, led by then Prime Minister Said Musa, entered into a bilateral energy cooperation agreement with Venezuela, led by then President Hugo Chavez, to purchase and import oil from the Venezuelan government-owned company, Petróleos de Venezuela S.A., on preferential financial terms. These preferential terms consisted of an agreement that stated that Belize could import fuel while only paying 50% upfront and selling the 50% balance over a concessionary period of 25 years at an interest rate of 1%. However, the cash portion had to be paid to PDVSA by APEL within 90 days of importation. APEL is a joint enterprise between the Venezuelan state-owned company and Belize Petroleum and Energy Limited. It was formed to handle the logistics of this project. With the newfound and bountiful capital from the Petrocaribe program, the UDP government, led by then Prime Minister Dean Barrow, invested in a new National Bank of Belize, road infrastructure projects, and multi-purpose facilities for sports and community gatherings. However, the current Prime Minister John Briceño believes that the spending is excessive and did not benefit from Belize.
I was actually shocked and dismayed to see how the Prime Minister has virtually abused the Constitution and the laws of this country when it comes to spending the people's money.
But some of my viewers with a background knowledge on this topic might realize something. Around the start of the former Prime Minister's term in office, which was roughly between 2007 and 2009, Petróleos de Venezuela S.A. only delivered $42 million worth of oil, meaning the concessionaire from behalf of that took $21 million. This is not a small amount, but it's not enough for the civic centers, the new National Bank of Belize, and all the projects that took place. So where exactly did this money come from? In 2012, Belize began to source all fuel products, that being gasoline, diesel, and kerosene, from Venezuela, resulting in a massive influx of available funds and allowing the government's massive infrastructure project. If we were to compare the concessionaire fund of $21 million from 2007 to 2009 to the concessionaire fund of $114,307,356 from 2012 to 2014, we see that the government had 544% more cash inflow from the agreement in those latter years. However, despite the veneer of infrastructure development and momentary economic prosperity, the loan was about to implode because of an unfortunately timed. So up until now, you've probably been wondering to yourself, how did the accounting and spending of this money go? Well, it went something like this. Hey, so I need you to give this money to that guy. Alright, and I'm just gonna keep this. No worries, man. I'll totally account for this properly. As far as I'm concerned, that was only slightly exaggeratory, because it was exactly this lack of accountability onto how the money was being accounted for and spent that ultimately led to the People United Party's Supreme Court lawsuit. Spearheading the PUP's lawsuit was Jules Espat, PUP representative for Cayo South. Espat's Supreme Court application had 4 requests. Number 1, the court declares that the repayment of the revised loan agreement of 2012 was unenforceable because Parliament did not authorize it. Number 2, the court declares that the government cannot use public funds to pay Venezuela and prevent them from making any such payments. Number 3, the court declares that any proceeds from the bilateral arrangement between Belize and Venezuela form a part of the development fund. And number 4, the court declares that all spending from this program, which has been done without Parliament approval, is unlawful. The crux of the lawsuit is twofold, but both lie in the 2005 Finance and Audit Reform Act. On page 123, it is stated that all revenues or other monies raised or received by Belize, not being revenues or other monies payable under the Belize Constitution, or under any other law into some specific public fund established for that purpose, shall be paid into and form one consolidated revenue fund. And on page 127, it is stated that any agreement, contract, or other instrument effecting any such borrowing or loan to the government of or above the equivalent of $10 million shall only be validly entered into a pursuant to a resolve of the National Assembly authorizing the government to raise the loan or to borrow the money. Despite the clear wording of the Reform Act, the Belizean government at the time still took it upon itself to deposit the funds into a special account at the central bank, commonly called the Petrocaribe funds, and they also gave themselves permission to spend funds totaling more than $10 million without National Assembly approval. This disregard for legality was a hangover from the previous PUP administration, which bled into the UDP. So both sides are equally at fault for this, but one side sure did benefit more than the other. In response to this Supreme Court application, the then Prime Minister Dean Barrett responded that the Venezuelans were in Belize 6 months ago and did a complete evaluation of the program. Following that, they gave Belize accolades for an impeccably ran program, he said. Unfortunately, being impeccably ran does not omit the fact that the money was not accounted for or spent to the country's legal specifications. And furthermore, the Prime Minister does not even give us the criteria for an impeccably ran program, so that claim also holds little weight. The Prime Minister makes other such claims as the Petrocaribe program being a special commercial and diplomatic arrangement. He claimed that the concessionaire funds were a credit to be paid instead of installments over 20 years, therefore not constituting a loan. However, although the loan did match one parameter of being a credit, which was that it was not a one-time lump sum of money, in every other way it was a loan. It was a long-term agreement with a predetermined lifespan that concluded without the ability to get more money later on. Seeing that it was a loan and not revenues or monies payable under any other fund in the Belizean Constitution, it belonged in the Consolidated Revenue Fund. However, despite the Prime Minister's claims that the Petrocaribe loans were a credit or a special commercial and diplomatic arrangement, he tried to pass a loan motion validating how his government handled the funds. Emphasis on the word loan. Members of Parliament and the Senate approved the Petrocaribe loan motion of 2015, which allows the government of Belize absolute power to borrow money from the Petrocaribe funds without prior authorization from the House of Representatives. The majority of members in our National Assembly saw this as necessary, despite the breach of previously mentioned legal precedent and the obvious conflicts of interest that this creates. Extremely briefly, I want to mention that all that is necessary for a bill to pass in Belize is a simple majority in the House of Representatives, which the party in power will always have, and a simple majority in the Senate, which the party in power only needs one senator not nominated by the Prime Minister to have. I think you can see why this is inherently dangerous. Senator Lisa Schumann had great insights into the insidious nature of this loan motion. We are being asked to approve after the fact in complete contravention of the law to confirm and validate the borrowing, not to approve it because they know we cannot approve it after the fact. We're being asked to confirm and validate the borrowing, and I'm not going to do that, Mr. President. Give us a breakdown. Give us an assurance that there is somewhere accounting of specifically what amounts were spent on what. Tell me what are the capital projects that you're financing and how much. With this money, tell me what sporting facilities are going to be constructed and how much. The loan motion was ultimately victorious over the PUP Supreme Court lawsuit. The PUP cited a change of laws and a lack of support from the Belizean people, which I believe is tragic, that those most harmed by this mismanagement are those that have the least problem with it. However, with the passing of this bill, the Prime Minister did promise to return to the House of Representatives periodically to explain how the Petrocaribe monies are being spent, which, according to everything I have been able to find, only happened once. But I want to quickly draw your attention to some language in the loan motion that further points to the dysfunctionality of the government. The shipment of petroleum products arrive in Belize at different times and in different quantities, and it cannot be ascertained beforehand the finance portion that would be lent by APEL to the GOB. It would therefore be expedient to make special provisions to govern the borrowing by the government of Belize from APEL to give effect to the Energy Cooperation Agreement between Belize and Venezuela. I would think that if the government is receiving these funds in varying quantities at random times, that it'd probably be a smarter idea to plan out how these funds are spent in advance instead of using them whenever they're available. After all, wouldn't it be a smarter idea to use a steady stream of revenue, such as taxes, to run the country's day-to-day affairs? However, 2 years after the loan motion's passing, the Petrocaribe program went under. Venezuelan Supreme Court magistrates ruled in favor of Socialist President Nicolas Maduro. allowing him to take away the opposition-led Congress's powers. As a result of this illegal and undemocratic consolidation of power, the Organization of American States decided to sanction Venezuela, sending the country spiraling into an economic and humanitarian crisis. Sanctions that the then UDP government abstained from voting on. Ultimately, as a result of these sanctions, oil importations from Venezuela became increasingly turbulent, and Belize had to opt to import oil from El Salvador, in effect withdrawing from the ally who gave them $400 million, but not without good reason. What I want you to take away from this video is not a moral judgment of any of the characters involved. Rather, I want you to take a look at the general culture surrounding the people and politicians that allow this mismanagement of funds to occur. It's probably infinitely more practical to look at our political system, which is filled with individuals who'd rather levy personal attacks at each other for short-term gains in a never-ending arms race to extract wealth at the cost of the proletariat. But the politicians are not squarely to blame here. All of that fault can be placed on the voters, who are likewise short-sighted and decadent. So what I do want you to take away from this video is that everyone is born into a set of circumstances which they can't control. But if you are put in a position of power, please use your highest moral intuitions to make choices. All right?